Okay, welcome to the New York Foreign Press Center. This is an on-the-record briefing today. We are honored to have with us the Special Envoy to Sudan and South Sudan, Ambassador Donald Booth. We also are lucky to have with us today the Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, Todd Haskell, who will take questions at the end of this briefing on the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, which is rolling out this year today. And that's all I'll say for now. I'd like to please welcome Ambassador Donald Booth.
Okay, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again, UNGA Week in New York. Let me just say a few words as an introduction, and happy to take questions. On South Sudan, as you may be aware, there was a high-level event on South Sudan that the Secretary General hosted on Tuesday morning. And the thrust of that meeting and the thrust of what the United States has been pushing is for forward movement on implementation of the peace agreement that was signed by the parties in late August. Since the signing of the peace agreement by the opposition and the group of former detainees on the 17th of August and by the government on the 26th of August, both armed groups have ratified the agreement through their legislative assemblies. They have issued orders for a cessation of hostilities, for a ceasefire, and they have engaged in a workshop on security issues in Addis Ababa under the aegis of the IGAD mediation team. There has been progress made in that regard. However, there was an interlude of an increase in fighting that happened shortly after the order for the ceasefire went out. The United States acted in the Security Council to propose sanctioning those generals that we felt were most responsible for that uptick in fighting. We believe that that action helped to contribute to the diminution of fighting that occurred a few days after that action was initiated. At this point, the focus really needs to be on getting stood up the mechanisms foreseen in the peace agreement, the most critical being that of the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Committee, the JMEC. The IGAD is supposed to appoint a chairman of the JMEC. We were hoping that that might happen this week. We again continue to urge IGAD to move forward and do that as quickly as possible. The JMEC will in effect become the locus for moving forward the implementation process. It will then be responsible for the monitoring mechanism which will oversee the ceasefire and the security arrangements. It will take over from IGAD's monitoring and verification mechanism. There are a number of other activities that need to be undertaken. The peace agreement itself needs to be reconciled into the existing South Sudanese constitution through the National Constitutional Amendment Commission. And the parties also need to get together and begin the actual preparations for the formation of the cabinet of the transitional government. The security arrangements, there is the need to move forward now on the separation of forces, as was discussed at the Addis workshop, the cantonment of forces by both sides, and the establishment of a joint military command center and a joint operations center that would also coordinate with the UN as well. All of these things need to move forward. We continue to press the parties to do so. We will be continuing to engage the South Sudanese parties on that. And as well as continuing to engage with the UN mission in South Sudan on the role that they can play. We are trying to move forward a resolution to extend the mandate of the UN mission in South Sudan and hope to that will be accomplished in the next few days. So that's really the focus on South Sudan. If I could just repeat it one more time, it's implementing the peace agreement. That is the focus that we have. On Sudan, which is the other account that I have about a month ago, did a visit to Khartoum. my first visit with engaging the government there since I had become envoy. It followed on a visit that we had by then Professor Gondour, now Foreign Minister Gondour, to Washington in February, where we were trying to resume the dialogue and the engagement necessary to find a way to address the issues of concern to both of our countries and to address the concerns in the bilateral relationship. From the U.S. perspective, the key message remains that Sudan needs to stop fighting its people, stop the wars in Darfur and the two areas, and find a way to move forward toward a political accommodation that will enable Sudan, which is a diverse country, to live at peace with itself. So that is the message we continue to press on that. We, again, will be engaging the Sudanese here on that, trying to advance that agenda. So let me leave it at that and take questions from you.
Vasco de Jesus, Vasco Press Comunicações, Brazil. I'm curious to know, you mentioned about the need for the Constitution to be amended to accept the peace agreement. And how far are we from that happening? If you can help me. Thank you.
The National Legislative Assembly has already ratified the peace agreement. So now this is really a technical legal matter of areas where the peace agreement may not be consistent with the existing constitution. For example, the peace agreement calls for the creation of the position of first vice president. It also calls for an expansion of the legislative assembly. So those are the types of issues that for legal purposes would need to be reconciled with the existing constitution. The National Constitutional Amendment Commission, the parties have nominated their representatives to that, but it has not actually sat down to meet. But it should be a relatively straightforward part of implementation of the agreement.
I had a couple of questions. My name is Ashish Pradhan. I'm from International Crisis Group. On South Sudan, I was wondering, you mentioned the JMAC chair position that hasn't been filled yet. I was wondering your views on why that hasn't happened. And on Sudan, you mentioned that the issue of the issue of the national dialogue, your views on that and why that has or hasn't been taken forward.
Well, on the JMAC chair, the IGAD heads of state need to discuss that and come to an agreement on the candidate, because the JMAC in the first instance will report to IGAD. It will also, the chair has the ability under the peace agreement to report also to the African Union Peace and Security Council and to the chairperson of the African Union, as well as to the Secretary General of the United Nations and to the Security Council of the United Nations. But the first line of reporting is to the guarantors of the agreement, and the guarantors are the other states of IGAD. So as soon as the heads of state have finished their consultations and agree on that candidate, I'm sure they will move forward. Again, we urge them to do that as quickly as possible. I did not actually mention the national dialogue, but it is something that when President Bashir first announced the idea of a national dialogue in January of 2014, he announced a dialogue that would be inclusive, that would include the armed as well as unarmed opposition, and would address the issues of peace, the economy, and national identity. And there was a welcoming of such a broad, inclusive national dialogue by the United States and by many other international partners. Because as President Mbeki, who has now long headed the African Union's efforts to not only to resolve outstanding issues between Sudan and South Sudan, but also to try to find a way to resolve the conflicts in Sudan, once stated, he said that there's not a Darfur problem in Sudan, there's a Sudan problem in Darfur. And by that he meant that it's the way that Sudan has been governed basically since independence with a very centralized focus that has resulted in various elements of population in the periphery of the country feeling disenfranchised, feeling not to be fully participating in the political life of the country. As you know, the civil war, Anyanya I and Anyanya II, that resulted ultimately in self-determination and independence for South Sudan, had gone on for a better part of 50 years, basically since independence, with only an 11-year break between 1972 and 1983. So this idea of not just addressing cessation of hostilities for one conflict and then another conflict, but to truly get at the underlying causes of those conflicts. And so the national dialogue was foreseen by many South Sudanese, including by the armed opposition, as a possible way forward on that. Unfortunately, the conditions for moving forward on that were not met. The idea of a pre-dialogue to discuss how to move forward on the dialogue that would have raised the confidence, particularly of the opposition, to participate in this was not attended by the government when President Mbeki tried to convene it in March of this year. So after the elections, the government announced that they would once again resume this national dialogue. They're talking about doing it this month, October. But again, there have been no actions taken that would create the conditions to bring in particularly the armed opposition, but also many of the unarmed opposition into this dialogue at this point. So we continue to encourage the government in Sudan to look at creating a conducive environment if it's to move forward on this. But our focus right now is encouraging both the government, which recently announced that it would undertake a 2-month cessation of hostilities, and the armed opposition, the Sudan Revolutionary Front, which recently indicated a willingness to undertake a 6-month cessation of hostilities, is to get those, the government and the opposition, to move forward on actually changing things on the ground, actually to stop the fighting, give that opening for negotiations to begin. And that, I think, would be one of the best confidence-building measures that could occur, which is if there's an absence of fighting, then the confidence to be able to go in and talk will be vastly increased.
Our VOA correspondent for Sudan is not here today, but submitted a question. I'm going to read that aloud. The State Department yesterday congratulated the AU Peace and Security Commission for releasing the report on human rights violations committed during the conflict in South Sudan. The last time the AU said it was releasing the report, it was given only to the government of South Sudan and after some militating to the opposition. Has the report been made available to the public this time around? If it has been released, and if it has been published, is the United States satisfied that this is indeed a full report into what happened in South Sudan? If not, do we know when it will be available? Thank you.
Well, we've welcomed the decision of the African Union's Peace and Security Council, which met at summit level here last Saturday to release the report. As far as I'm aware, at this very moment, we have not actually seen a copy of it, but they have committed that it will be released in the very near future. So we look forward to that. We obviously would like to read it. We have not seen it to date, and we'll then decide, obviously, what we think of it. We can't prejudge what we haven't read. But we believe that the report it covers a crucial period of the conflict in South Sudan and will contribute, I think, to the work of accountability and reconciliation that is foreseen in the peace agreement, both to contribute to the work of the National Commission for Healing and Reconciliation and to the hybrid court, which the peace agreement called for the African Union to work with Sudan to establish.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Ambassador Booth, a quick question. To the many people in South Sudan who may feel apathetic towards the peace process, do you have any words to the people of South Sudan regarding U.S. support and international support to the people?
The U.S. commitment has been very consistent and very strong to the people of South Sudan. As they have endured this totally unnecessary man-made conflict, which has inflicted so much pain and suffering and death, many of them. It's created a humanitarian crisis in the country. We have been the leading donor. We've contributed over $1.3 billion of humanitarian assistance. We've also maintained some of our development activities in areas such as health, education, and agriculture, which directly benefit people. So the United States has stood with the people of South Sudan. We stood with them during their long fight to achieve self-determination and independence. We've stood with them through this conflict, and we will continue to stand with the people of South Sudan and with those of their leaders who will commit themselves to making this peace agreement work. It's absolutely essential that we have the leadership of South Sudan committed to this peace agreement. That really is going to be the peace dividend for the people of South Sudan. It's going to be the absence of fighting and being able to move forward once again to try to move on development of the country and to create that sense of nationhood so that, again, that diverse country can begin to move forward in peace and tranquility. Great.
Thank you, Ambassador.